Okay, good afternoon. I'm just going to wait a few seconds for the room to fill out. Virtual room, that is. Before we get going and underway, I'll be asking my glamorous assistants to give me the nod when we have a reasonable number of people in the virtual room, and then we'll crack on. Okay, we'll just a few more seconds and then we will definitely get going. Excellent. Okay, we will crack on. Apologies for the slight delay there. Welcome to the second online session of the Electricity Storage Network Annual Conference. My name is Ollie Frankland. I'm the Electricity Storage Network lead, and I will be chairing today's session. And it's obviously part of a much larger collection of content that I'll go through in just one second. But in terms of the Electricity Storage Network, what is it? It is a collection of over 60 member organizations now. We've been growing over the last year or so, and are leading the electricity storage sector in the UK, effectively trying to pull together a voice for the electricity storage sector and ensure that there is a fair regulatory framework for the electricity storage sector moving forward. And we have over 5 working groups and actually 2 more that we're going to add this year, looking at a whole range of different things, including grid connections, markets and revenues, and we're looking at REMA as well coming up this year as well. So yeah, a whole range of stuff for you to get involved in. If you aren't members yet, please do join, and thank you very much for those members in the virtual room. We are very indebted to you. Before I move on, I think yesterday, for those that managed to join us yesterday, we had an in-person aspect to this conference as well as an online aspect. So you've joined the second of our online sessions. But yesterday we had a in-person conference at the IET in the Embankment in London. Really buzzy room, loads of people there. So thank you for making the time to come along. And for those who missed out, definitely come along next year. And we've got, I can't possibly summarize all of the stuff that we discussed. We had some excellent panel sessions and some really good speakers. And I thought the quality of people in the room was actually really high. But I would say that I'm biased, but it really was. So now we're moving on to the online aspects of the agenda. We've had our co-location session earlier on today, and now we're going to be moving on to response service saturation. Where do future revenues come from? And finally, tomorrow we've got 3 sessions, so a fair amount on the agenda in terms of looking at long duration energy storage. What is its role in the net zero energy system, which definitely came up a lot in the discussions yesterday. Fire safety, so a kind of crucial area of the development, particularly of lithium ion. What's best practice? Where are we innovating? That's a kind of useful one for those kind of putting projects and kit in the ground at the moment. And finally, we finish off with grid connections, probably one of the biggest talking points yesterday, and at any industry event that you go to at the moment is right up there in terms of a kind of a barrier and some significant changes on the way there as well, which we will unpick tomorrow. Very quick bit of housekeeping so that we're all on the same page. So this is Zoom webinars. So at the bottom panel, you should have a Q&A function which you can click on, and that will allow you to submit questions to us, and I'll be making sure that we try and cover those off throughout the session. Pardon me. And a reminder to like those questions as well. So those that you want answered, click the little kind of like button effectively, and then that will kind of move up the priority queue, and I can go to those first. The chat function is basically the discussion board, so you can use that just to share any thoughts you had, any questions, or sorry, any documents or reports that you want to share. So please do use that as well. And finally, we will be recording it, so we will be sharing the sessions afterwards. And I'll call out our sponsors now for helping us to allow these sessions to be free in terms of we maximize the audience. So thank you to Redknight Taylor, Schneider Electric, Ethical Power Connections, and Fluence, as well as AmpX. And those organizations have really helped allow these sessions to be free and open, and then obviously really helped with yesterday, the in-person aspects, which were a bit more expensive. Fantastic. So just going to revenues. I'm just going to spend a couple of minutes to introduce the revenue area and what we are doing in the revenue space at the Electricity Storage Network. As I mentioned, we've got a whole selection of working groups, but the two ones that are really focusing in on revenues are the Markets and Revenues Working Group. Yeah, name says it all. And we've had some really good discussions on the capacity market, balance and mechanism skip rates recently, loads of really the frequency response reforms that are coming through. So we do have some very, very useful discussions within that one. And also following on from that, we have our strategic liaison meeting with the National Grid ESO, which is again an opportunity to kind of interact with a slightly different group, and we pull in the people from the ESO to discuss whatever we want to do in that agenda. And let's started to kind of really unpick some of the kind of key questions in terms of revenues, and looking at other optimization challenges around some of the kind of new revenues that are coming on, and lots within that, and all of those work. So the ESO strategic liaison meeting is every 2 months, and the Markets and Revenue Working Group is quarterly, and we have 3 other working groups on top of that. So there is plenty to be getting involved in terms of membership. So please do make sure you sign up and get along to those. We'll share links to those in the follow-up as well. And just to set the scene, really, we'll probably be discussing these in a lot more detail in just a second with my fantastic panel. But I thought it would be useful just to kind of track the evolution of frequency response products as like an example of how revenues are shifting and how they've shifted over time and over the last 6 years or so. And I think for those with been in the industry quite a while, it has been a wild ride over the last few years, but really kicked off in terms of battery storage, the enhanced frequency response market, which was obviously high value, allowed a few projects to get a foothold, and actually launched a whole swathe and pipeline of projects off the back of that. We obviously, in 2016, we've had firm frequency response and all the derivatives below that from kind of 2016, 2017 onwards. And that is continuing to be a very successful market for battery storage and electricity storage more generally. We don't quite know the end date, but it is due. It is planned, depending on who you ask, is kind of when that will end. And we've got the kind of brand new and probably one of the most kind of biggest success stories around Dynamic Containment, which was launched in 2021 and has really shifted the game in terms of particularly kind of a battery-only market, particularly lithium-ion batteries playing in that market very successfully, and has been fairly high value, although the values have kind of gone down, and we can kind of bring this up in a second, but whether we're kind of starting to meet saturation and how that looks like in the future. So that's just a very quick introduction to the wonderful world of revenues that we're going to hopefully be going through in just 1 second. And the only other thing I wanted to highlight is we've pulled together some data on the pipeline, which is very large, and we pulled that together through all the available data sets, and we're going to chuck it in the chat so anyone can have a look at that. My colleagues will hopefully be doing that in just 1 second. But basically the kind of the key message that comes out of that is that there's a ridiculously sized pipeline. On the screen, we're saying 90 gigawatts at least. A lot of that is co-located, and I suppose the kind of key question, and the very much larger projects are coming online now as well this year and next year, hundreds of megawatts coming online. And what are the impacts on markets and revenues associated with having much more battery storage on the system and much larger projects on the system as well? I think that's something we're looking to kind of explore in the next 50 minutes or so. Okay, and yes, I would highlight, please do get your questions in, and I'll do my best to get around them. So I'm going to introduce the panel. We have pulled together the great and the good from the revenue industry, the battery storage industry. So I will let themselves introduce themselves. So first off, I will go to Robin. So if you could just introduce yourself, your organization, and particularly your role in revenues around electricity storage, that would be brilliant. And I'll move to the rest of the panel after that.
Thank you, Ollie. Nice to be on the call. So my name is Robin Lucas. I am Chief Analytics Officer at Modo Energy, and we are an asset success platform, and we have about 90%, if not more, of the owners and operators of battery energy storage. So we're talking about grid scale storage really here in the UK that subscribe to our platform. So what we do is we track all of the grid scale storage across GB. Everyone that's above 7 megawatts, track the markets that they are participating in, and provide benchmarking figures for how much batteries are earning in GB on a monthly basis. And we also provide some forecasts for what we think batteries are going to be earning over the next 3 years, and keep a really close eye on the evolution of all the markets. Produce quite a lot of content that you may have seen around LinkedIn and the Modo platform, which has lots of free stuff on it as well, trying to kind of educate and bring more people into the industry on the wonderful world of battery storage. So I've been in batteries since about 2016, I've been at Modo for about a year, and previously very much more on the optimizer space.
Brilliant, thanks, Robin. I will move on to Roger. Same question. Organization and what's your interest in revenues?
Thanks, Ollie. Thanks for inviting us on. So yeah, I'm Roger Hollies. I'm the CTO at Arenco. So we're a technology company working in the wonderful energy storage space. We provide a range of services and software products, from full market access, including optimization, down to API products that provide kind of data standardization and what we like to call an ecosystem for the industry to freely innovate. So Arenco and I have been working on the front line of this industry with batteries since 2016. And right now our Nimbus platform, which is the name for our software product, controls over 300 megawatts of active batteries in the UK. So I love this industry. I don't think there's a more fun industry to be in if you like a complex engineering problem and a noble cause. Batteries are wonderfully complicated pieces of kit, and we use them to solve wonderfully complicated engineering problems in terms of system-wide problems via wonderfully complex markets and services. And all of this is working towards a more sustainable energy system, which is fantastic. So over the past kind of 7 years of working in the industry, we've seen this evolve at an incredible rate. From when we started, there were just 2 batteries plugged in, the grid scale, totaling 11 megawatts. One of those was our little 1 megawatt trial battery. And now we've got over 100, I think, assets plugged in, and nearly 2 gigawatts of energy storage live. In your graph just now showed we're going up to potentially 19 megawatts, which probably won't happen, but the pipeline is always interesting in indicating, the appetite to get involved in this industry. When we started, there were probably 4 viable markets for those batteries to play in, and it was difficult to get in. Now we're into we're into double figures, right, of markets that you can play in with batteries, and there are more coming online, and there's just more and more opportunities. So this is an exciting and important debate as to how these markets are going to evolve. But I'm going to set out my stall quite earlier on, is that we just don't know what this future revenue stack's going to be. We know what it looks like. We know the components. We know that it's linked to volatility. We know volatility is increasing. And we know that flexibility is valuable and getting more valuable, especially as we drive towards an affordable and sustainable energy system and the changes needed. So we need flexible assets, being controllable, flexible, and nimble software. And the past 2 years has shown just how nimble that has to be to react to external factors that fundamentally change what the system needs, which is why we can't predict exactly what's going to be, but we can predict that you need this flexibility to respond to the volatility. So yeah, really interested in getting stuck into the discussion.
Excellent. Thanks, Roger. Much appreciated. Emma, if I can come to you next to do a quick intro.
Cheers, Ali. Hi, Emma Burns. I'm head of regulation here at Flextricity. So Flextricity are an aggregator, an optimizer, a route to market provider for battery storage and other kinds of flexible assets. So also demand side response, gas peakers, CHP, that kind of thing. My background in the industry is about 12 years, first half broadly in kind of regulation and regulators, and second half as a consultant. So yeah, I've worked kind of with battery storage and other flexibility markets for most of that time. And I'd say my special interest is probably regulation and sort of how do we knock down barriers to enabling markets for flexibility and battery storage.
Excellent. Thanks, Emma. Paul, please introduce yourself.
Hi, everyone. I'm Paul Rowe-Jones. I'm the Revenue Optimization Lead at Zenobē. So Zenobē are an asset owner. We own and build grid-scale storage batteries. We have about 90 megawatts that we trade directly or hand off to operators depending on the month and the market conditions. And we've most recently built the new 100 megawatt Capenhurst site. So this is a big, it's made of 4 BMUs, 25 megawatts each, transmission connected. Very exciting, just went live last month. And we have a lot more in the pipeline. We also operate electric buses, and we are trying to take the batteries from those electric buses and then give them a second life and use those batteries to manage the sort of site connection sizing and do clever things like that. So it makes a bus optimization and battery storage. My background, I've been at Zenobē for 3 months now. And before that, my career was at National Grid. I did a number of different roles there, working on the capacity market and delivering the first capacity auctions, trading, so bringing power in and pushing power out to Europe, and most recently in the control room as a national balancing engineer and zonal balancing engineer, so doing the kind of minute by minute balancing of the power system. My interest in batteries really sort of took off around 2018, and I started to see that, you know, the optimization problem that National Grid are trying to solve, these sort of assets that you can put lots of reactive power, lots of frequency response onto the system without having to synchronize an extra CCGT, started to solve lots of problems simultaneously, and I thought there must be a lot of value there. So that was what drove me to make the switch.
Excellent. So thank you to introduce yourselves, panel. An excellent panel. I think we'll all agree. So that was very useful. So I think maybe if we look back initially first, so last year was a particularly interesting year for revenues. Is there anything that the panel would like to highlight in terms of last year and any changes that they saw in the market? Anything was particularly interesting in the market they'd like to highlight for electricity storage? Maybe if I go to you first, Robin, as you do a lot of kind of market tracking and revenue tracking, that'd be useful.
Yeah, I think one of the main things to notice as of kind of the back end of last year is that we are now very much in a saturated world in terms of the amount of battery storage on the system now exceeds the amount of frequency response, which has primarily been where batteries have made their money up until now. And that means the prices in those frequency response markets have really crashed. And over the course of the year, we saw like the all-time high revenues, which were in June. So batteries were hitting about £270,000 per megawatt on an annualized basis, whereas in December they dropped off to about just over £100,000. And that was really because of the fall in dynamic containment prices, and that's because we're now in a saturated world. So dynamic containment makes up the bulk of the volumes of the frequency response services. So this is a post-fault service. So when big power stations trip, for example, you might get quite a large frequency deviation, and batteries will very quickly kick in to rebalance the system. And that forms the bulk of the services, kind of 700 megawatts-ish, depending on system conditions on any one particular day. And yeah, the prices in that were £17 per megawatt hour for a really long time. There was a price cap, and we had an unsaturated market. Everybody bid in with their very smart optimization algorithms at £17 per megawatt hour. We've then since seen that price cap and be lifted, and various changes to the auction structure, which have really enabled kind of much more functioning marketplace across the dynamic suite. So first of all in dynamic containment, and then the other two services which followed in April last year, dynamic regulation and moderation. So it's been really, really fun to kind of see how the prices in these services have changed and actually be more economically driven with the amount of market participants and the amount that the ESO actually need to procure, which means that we see very different prices within a single day for each of these services. But yeah, from that sort of flat £17 per megawatt hour, we saw peak prices of dynamic containment of over £100. And then that kind of regularly now settles at about £6 is sort of the average price at the moment for DC low. So it's been this huge change in revenues over the course of the year. A huge drop off in dynamic containment low, particularly, which is that main revenue stream. And really, the really exciting thing is to see the increase in wholesale revenues. And in December, particularly, that was the first month where we saw more wholesale revenues than frequency response revenues, than DC revenues. So they made up about 38% of the fleet's total revenues were from wholesale, which was actually mainly from just one day. Which was the first time that's overtaken those ancillary revenues. So it really is a kind of a sign of things to come.
Excellent. Thank you, Robin. That was very helpful to set the scene. I'll maybe move to Roger. So from a kind of optimization point of view, how did you find 2022 and kind of, yeah, those months?
Yeah, similar message really to Robin. I think it was the diversity of operation that we saw as those markets got saturated. You started seeing people looking at different strategies. You had DR and DM come in the spring as well, so another few hundred megawatts of opportunity there. But yeah, one of the interesting things about DC is when it came in, we were ourselves actually in Flextricity, Emma, we were making really good progress on the BM. We were starting to get good market efficiency, good interaction. DC came in and at £17, just wipe the floor with any opportunities to trade.
Sorry, just try and dynamic containment. We'll try and not use too many acronyms and DM.
Dynamic containment. Then the new markets, dynamic regulation and dynamic moderation, which are kind of holding the frequency at a decent level rather than this post fault. And then the BM, which is the balancing mechanism, which is the mechanism whereby the ESO, after gate closure, once everybody's bought and sold all their electricity, National Grid have to keep the weights and measures, keep supply to equal demand. So that market batteries are really good for the balancing mechanism because they can respond really quickly, really accurately. The balancing operation and desk, they need a shape filled. They can use batteries to really specifically fill a gap in power or demand or supply. And we were seeing really good tractions. Then the frequency response dynamic containment market came along. Just for 2 years, we really saw nothing else on the market. The end of last year, we started seeing saturation. We started seeing traction in the other markets like the wholesale market, where people are starting to use batteries just to trade on the intraday and day ahead market. But really excitingly, we started seeing the balancing mechanism because there were volumes. So the balancing mechanism, it's operated by humans. And when there was 1 or 2 batteries on there, it wasn't interesting. All of a sudden now we've got gigawatts of batteries on the balancing mechanism and a tool for the desk to use. And I think that, combined with the increase in volatility that we've seen at the back end of last year, has really, really opened that market up. And that, combined with the different strategies around the different frequency response services, I think just, drove that diversity of operation, which was really exciting to see last year.
Great, thanks for that, Roger. Useful overview. Emma, I'll come to you as well. Is there anything you want to add in terms of last year?
I guess to put a different spin on the saturation narrative, I would say last year was the year when revenue streams really became established and kind of trusted. I think back to conversations I would have had in person before everything happened in the world, between forums, and the idea of battery asset trading, the balancing mechanism or wholesale seemed, years away. Well, it was years away, but it seemed, and then as Roger said, along came dynamic containment, and, and as Robin helpfully outlined, it sort of evolved in terms of the market dynamics and price caps and that kind of thing. But now I feel like there's a very sort of well-trusted and well-established set of revenues for battery storage. I think investors are more comfortable with the idea of revenue jumping. So this idea of going, dynamic containment for certain parts of the day, then wholesale, then BM, being agile and optimizing your revenues. I think investors are much more comfortable now about business cases built around that than they used to be, when there used to be much more of a greater desire, I suppose, for long-term price certainty. Either through the capacity mechanism or the enhanced frequency response contracts that we had back in whenever that was, 2016. It really feels like this is just BAU now. Battery storage is BAU in terms of the revenue stack, which I think is really exciting.
Excellent, thanks, Emma. And just a reminder to get your questions in the Q&A function, and I'll be kind of going to that and making sure to uprate and like the ones that you want to get to the top, and to inform the discussion. But I've got a few more questions for you, if that's okay, panel. But Paul, maybe before I move on, so is there anything you would highlight? Obviously, you kind of shifted over from the ESO into the private sector.
Yeah,
into
absolutely. So just, kind of following on from Roger's comments. So I was one of those humans in the control room dispatching these batteries, and they're fantastic for being able to fill in these small fast frequency deviations, and increasingly we're seeing National Grid utilize them for longer periods of time as well. I think over the course of 2022 it's been everything's been going into DC because the prices have been so extreme over the summer, and maybe a bit of the pressures come off the ESO in terms of its systems development. And then as we're coming out of the other side of that price excitement, and BM, I think in the very near future is going to be a much more important part of that alternative strategy to going into the frequency response services. So BM stacks quite nicely with day ahead plus intraday plus that's that wholesale route to market. And it's not just me saying this. This is the ESO acknowledges that they have systems development issues where they need to be able to dispatch more BOAs, more bid offer acceptances faster to be able to make full use of these battery assets. So right now, BM is a kind of tiny sliver on the kind of total revenues for batteries. I think in the next few years, but hopefully in the next few months, that'll fasten up. Yeah.
Exciting. Okay, next few months for sure. I'm keen to kind of maybe unpick them. What have been the biggest revenue challenges? So there's obviously been a lot of progress. I mean, you mentioned that kind of the progress in the market, maturing in the market. Have there been any particular bumps in the road, let's put it that way, over the last 12, 18, 24 months that you'd highlight that have kind of changed the game a little bit? If I go to you, Robin.
Yeah, I think the kind of record revenues that people have been seeing in the last 12 months are not going to be the picture going forward. And people have probably got very comfortable with that quite volatile investment case, because if you had an operational storage asset this year, you're looking at a payback of like 3 years. It's a really, really, really great investment to have. But now we're in saturated markets. That is no longer going to be the case. So we're going to have to get used to slightly lower revenues going forward. And I think one of the most difficult things kind of keep track of, and maybe for optimizers, is just being able to participate in all of the different markets and keep track of all the changes, because they are continually evolving, and you might need to make changes to your technology, how you interact with the control room, the data that you send, etc., and the markets that are available, and the timeframes of all of those. And keeping track of how your strategies for bidding into DC, for example, you might need to change that quite regularly. And we've seen we use this word revenue agility, when the best performing assets are able to jump between different markets on a daily basis, or even in ether block by ether block, which is 4 hours of a day at a time. And it's all about trying to forecast the market in which you're going to get the best return for your asset. And you might need to bear in mind the age of your asset, the cycling capability of your asset, if it's got temperature restrictions, where your asset is going to be able to make the most money in whichever market, and then being able to bid it and then actually operate it in that market successfully, and not have a bunch of performance penalties off the back of doing it badly. Yeah, it's quite a challenge, I think, for a lot of people to keep up with.
Yeah, I think I'll flow it over to Roger then, because that is, yeah. So you're saying double-digit markets to keep abreast of, and have the changes and the performance requirements. Challenging, I think it's fair to say.
Yeah, loads of fun. And Robin touched on it there. You're also all the optimizers are going to have to deal with, and all the asset owners deal with reality that you're dealing with portfolios as well. It's not just an individual asset where you can kind of know what it's going to do, because there's inherent understanding. When you've got a portfolio, you can't consider each asset as an individual. You have to understand that your systems have to understand automatically what that asset can do in order to respond quickly enough. And I think that's a real challenge, the speed at which the markets are changing. Robin spoke about it there. And the real challenge is to build a system on both sides, the entire industry, that is nimble enough to deal with the rate of change we need to see. This journey towards digitization is a real sticking point. So we've evolved into a software company. We used to own and operate assets, and we built our software for ourselves, and realized actually the software and the concepts in software are the important part. So we've learned firsthand how difficult digitization and software transformations are to do well. So how to turn a really complex problem into a simple and elegant solution that automates as much of the toil away from the user and provides the correct information to make the decisions that need to be done manually. I think the ESO have just an incredible challenge and role to play in this, to modernize their technology. And this has been one of the pinch points we've seen when the choices that our interfaces use. So for instance, the ESO, when they choose a technology, if it's not a technology that is or it's from a legacy system, so it's not a modern technology choice, it's from a legacy system, the implications for the rest of the industry are huge, because we have to develop against that. And yes, that might change next year. We still have to build that, invest in that, in teams. The software is a very expensive business, and then potentially bin that and spin up something else with a more enduring solution. So I think the digitization piece, how we actually use data, provide data, and build interfaces between the market participants, that has probably been one of the biggest challenges this year. But I see that as being a major challenge with all these new markets, which will require new interfaces, and making sure they are machine-to-machine interfaces. You cannot have humans doing everything that needs to be done in a portfolio scenario. So making sure that the counterparties and ESO are doing some great engagement on this to make sure their systems are, but there's, they've got to keep the lights on in a system that's fundamentally changing. They have a massive array of things that they have to balance and consider. But fundamentally, to get the counterparties to be able to deliver, they need to simplify their technology choices and make sure they're choosing the right routes.
Thanks, Roger. That's useful. Paul, I'm not sure if you want to come in. There was ESO was mentioned a few times there, Energy System Operator. How did you feel? Yeah, what was it behind the scenes?
Yeah, if you right now, these batteries are manually dispatched. Okay, so if the frequency is plummeting and you need those megawatts very quickly, and you have a choice between putting in a single 300 megawatt instruction or a set of 20, 15 megawatt instructions, it's going to take you a long time. You need those megawatts in kind of 1 minute. I can't send 20 instructions manually in 1 minute. The ESO are addressing this, so they are developing systems and promising changes, and we're trying to make sure we're engaged with them to ensure that we're ready when their systems do change. And I think the latest roadmap puts quite sizable changes at the end of 2023. So I mean, it's kind of for them to do this, but as an industry, I think we need to make it really very apparent that the BM is going to become a bigger part of the investment case. And I think what's difficult for us at the moment is the instability in BM utilization. So a few weeks ago, we had a very windy period. We were all getting very excited because we started to see assets sitting in the BM and doing that wholesale strategy, outperforming those sitting in DR. And to be honest, we tried to do the same thing, same conditions, it didn't work out. So being able to forecast that BM utilization and kind of know when it's valuable for the system operator and when it isn't, I think is going to be really, really important for us. And just say the actual sort of dispatch engineers in the control room, they do want to do things efficiently, but they are kind of limited by the systems that they have at the moment. And it is hard, it is complicated.
Fascinating. Thank you, Paul. So I think I'll try and come out to the audience to answer some questions. I think some of them we might have already covered, but I'll try and weave them in as well. So we first question we've got up there in terms of the most upvotes is around. So it's quite a long question, but summarizing is effectively saying, do we have enough revenues available given the cost of building a new site? Do those things currently match up? And Robin, you kind of mentioned this already, is that if we are getting to kind of saturation, and 2022 was a freak year potentially in terms of revenues, is there enough revenue available in order to build sites now in the current conditions, market conditions? If I go to Robin first, and then Roger.
I think some of the valuations so we all know that the grid connections are one of the biggest issue in building new sites. And as a result, if you do have a grid connection, at whichever stage along that connection might be, the value of that site is, much higher than if you don't have one. And I think it's probably fair to say that some of those are slightly overvalued, a grid connection with a site, and you're certainly not going to be seeing the same kind of paybacks that we have seen previously. That said, we had FFR, which is firm frequency response, which was the kind of previous mainstay of battery storage, which is still hanging around just about. FFR got saturated back in sort of 2018, and we had a similar plummet in revenues for these kind of systems. But we've still managed to, build a lot of systems, and investors are now much more comfortable with the investment case, and that these revenues will be volatile. So I think we're probably going to be seeing slightly longer return on investments, but there's still a huge appetite to invest in this space, even with the long-term projections as they are at the moment from those people that provide them.
Thanks, Robin. Roger?
Yeah, I think absolutely the revenues are there, and Ollie touched on it slightly in terms of the BM being a major part of revenue moving forward. If you think about the depth of these markets, FFR is running at 300 megawatts firm frequency response. DC about 600 megawatts either side, so 1500 in total, 1.5 gigs. The BM can be anywhere between 1 and 10 gigawatts. We know that that's probably going to increase with increasing volatility. And then you look at the wholesale market, you're talking about tens and tens of gigawatts. So the depths of those markets, and if you think about the evolution, the frequency response markets have taken the large chunk and really injected the levels of revenues, maybe slightly escalated, but we've already kind of proven that the BM and wholesale revenue opportunity is there, and that model works, and that model generates enough of a return to build these assets. And if you think about the depth of those, and those are only going to get deeper as we electrify more, electrify transport, electrify heat, the market is just going to increase in size. Yes, there's a huge pipeline of energy storage out there, but the day where we start saturating the wholesale market will be a very, very clean day, should we put that, because it'll all be renewables and batteries, which would be amazing with other grid supporting technologies. So I think categorically, yes, there are the revenues in the markets.
Excellent. Emma, Paul, do you want to come on this as well in terms of that kind of future revenue versus kind of can you get your cost of capital back?
Yeah, I think I'll just say, our investment cases for our assets aren't based on the ancillary service revenues. They're based on being able to make enough in the wholesale market and expectations about doing that. Yeah.
I suppose I wouldn't add too much other than to say, yes, I do believe also revenues are there. It comes down to optimization strategy, revenue stacking, all that good stuff. And in terms of being able to forecast prices for these, I would always take any forecasts of balancing services prices with a grain of salt, because it's very, very difficult. But I'm sure people keep trying.
Challenging, yes, I can imagine the case. I think, Robin, you have released that service fairly recently, so you're aware of the challenges there, Robin. Well, wasn't planned, obviously.
So I would add to that, Ollie, in that most of the batteries we've seen come to market because of the planning restrictions have been up to 50 megawatts. And we've had 2 new sites come online, like operationally online in December. So it's Pillswood and then the Capenhurst system from Zenobē. And there are lots more, like more than 100 megawatt sites coming online. And the business case for those sites, has nothing to do with ancillary services pretty much, because you fill up the entire market with one site. It doesn't really work. So those deep liquid wholesale and BM revenues are really underpinning that business case. But there is a huge amount of uncertainty in those BM revenues because we have basically no data to go across. They stack up, 1 or 2% of historic revenues. Having tried to do it at length, forecasting future off of very little data is tricky. It's really tricky, and you can use kind of fundamentals principles, but as Emma says, they need to be taken with a pinch of salt. Yet they are being invested in, and investment decisions are going through. So it shows, how much we do need storage as a fundamental infrastructure that's going to underpin the transition of our electricity system. It's exciting.
Can I just add one more thing to this?
Go for it.
Which I think one of the really, really exciting parts of this is that the revenues underpinning wholesale and BM, when they become consistent, as I think they will do very, very quickly, that will actually hold up the prices of DM, the frequency response markets, because why would you bid in a month ahead on FFR at a price, of £5 or £6 when with quite good certainty that you're going to be able to make £10 per megawatt per hour with a stacked imbalance trading balancing mechanism and wholesale strategy. So you're going to hopefully see this nice flow back as those revenues start getting proven, that will kick back into the day ahead dynamic moderation, dynamic regulation and containment markets, and then further ahead, then if there are longer term ahead markets that people are bidding into, the revenues will be held up because there will be opportunity costs that you wouldn't want to, you wouldn't want to take a certain really low revenue over potentially less certain, but hopefully growing the uncertainty, higher revenue.
Yeah, that said, for the last quarter of 2022, so October, November, December, FFR turned out to be the best returning market. And that's because actually we had a much less volatile, lower priced winter than we thought we were going to when we were going in. So FFR, which is a month ahead procured product, so actually it's sort of 6 to 8 weeks before real-time delivery, was a really good hedge, because people thought that the opportunity cost was going to be a lot higher, and that opportunity was priced into those frequency response contracts. And actually the outturn in the day ahead services, which were much more real time, was much lower. So it works both ways, both in an increasing market and a falling market. And we saw very recently there was some press put out by Statkraft and Stratera that they'd done their first forward trade, and that's kind of a whole nother class of kind of financial instruments which you can trade this flexibility in. So it'd be really interesting to see how those kind of things evolve.
Agreed. And I suppose I'm keen to kind of look into the future. So as you say, you're talking about looking into the future. So what we're talking about, much larger projects coming online, definitely an aspect of that saturation in some of the key markets. And I suppose if I come to you, Paul, in terms of, you've obviously got one of those big assets online now, what do you see as the most exciting revenue opportunities? So got a question there regarding kind of inertia, fault current provision, and we mentioned longer end of trading in the spot market. So is there what are you particularly interested in? And I know you're very interested in reserve markets yourself, but
yeah. So I mean, I think there's a structural inefficiency in the way ancillary services are procured at the moment. So if you're coming up to a big demand peak, and you as the ESO, you have this demand uncertainty, you need to make sure that you're maintaining your optionality, and that means you're going to make sure you hold on to inflexible assets. You might have to run an additional CCGT, and effectively that running is going to be a availability payment to access the energy in short timescales, is a way of creating that kind of flexibility. Whereas if you have the flexible asset and you're providing that flexibility anyway, you might just not get utilized. So there's a sort of reward for being inflexible, really. And so I'm really excited about new services like Quick Reserve, and the new Balancing Reserve service. Balancing Reserve with the caveat that you have this 50 megawatt de minimis threshold, which is due to the systems issues we were talking about earlier. But what something like Balancing Reserve or Quick Reserve does is it puts an explicit price on that flexibility. It puts an explicit price on reserves. And that allows a flexibility provider to say, okay, well, these are the kinds of revenues that we can get because we have these kinds of dynamics. And I think that's just missing from the sort of suite of ancillary services at the moment. So yeah, I'm really excited about Balancing Reserve and Quick Reserve, because they start to do that. Whether they're the end state, maybe not, but as a kind of first step into explicitly pricing reserves, I think they're really exciting.
Thanks, Paul. Much appreciated. Maybe if I come to you, Emma, in terms of any kind of future, particularly around the policy or expert in policy, what do you see as the most interesting policy changes on the horizon that will impact the revenue stack?
Oh gosh, policy. Well, I mean, we haven't said the word REMA yet. So the review of market arrangements that BEIS is doing, I don't think we should open that particular can of worms because we'll be here all day. And I suppose suffice to say that everything is in scope currently, so anything could happen. But I think there is definitely a clear message from government that they want a stronger locational signal. So I think from a policy government REMA perspective, coming down the line will certainly be some form of stronger locational signal, whether that's wholesale prices, whether that's balancing services or use of system charges, network charges remains to be seen. But yeah, you can't ignore the REMA elephant in the room, I suppose, when you're talking about the future.
Agreed. and any particular kind of future revenue streams?
Yeah, well, the things that I'm most interested in are kind of these non-traditional balancing services. So we mentioned them already, you mentioned them, and I think Roger and Paul, this idea that as the proportion of synchronous generation is falling and renewables is increasing, we're not getting things like stability, voltage, etc., naturally from thermal generators. So I really like the kind of grid forming part of the market because it's new, it's novel, and there's long-term contracts available as well through National Grid's Pathfinders, uniquely long-term contracts available there, whereas the trend, I suppose, for most other balancing services is closer to real-time procurement, providing that optionality, as was mentioned earlier. But I think probably we need the balance between short-term procurement and longer-term contracts and tenders.
That's great. And I suppose we haven't got too long left, so maybe still future gazing. I'll come to you, Roger and Robin, in terms of what do you see the most important revenue streams, the most interesting revenue streams, but also there's a question there around are there any examples or lessons we can learn from international markets to kind of weave in there? Apologies, that's quite a lot to get your head around. But is there anything that you see in any of the US markets or on the continent that you think maybe we should be doing a bit more of in the GB? Although, to be fair to the ESO, they're doing a lot of great stuff, and they got a lot of plaudits yesterday regarding their pathfinders, etc. So, anything you would highlight, Robin, first?
So GB focused, I'm really excited to see the changes that will come into the balancing or the control room systems, which should help BM skip rates come September and December of this year, and that I think will be transformational in terms of getting more storage actually built. Looking abroad, so we're doing quite a lot of work in ERCOT in Texas at the moment, and their markets are sort of completely different to how we do things there. And the power markets and the ancillary markets are coupled. And actually, sometimes you find that ancillary markets set the price for power markets, and the participating entities, so large suppliers, have to procure their own balancing services as opposed to someone like a system operator doing it. And so you have far more bilateral contracts around. It's just interesting to have a completely different perspective on the way things could be done, whether that's successful or not. Obviously, they have incredibly volatile pricing. There's total kind of free markets where security of supply isn't necessarily guaranteed, and there's no capacity market. But kind of interesting to probe how things are done elsewhere. We've been talking yesterday, Marek was saying about going to shorter settlement periods, in a highly renewable society where everything changes very quickly. That would be much more efficient. But again, it all comes down to the systems that the operator has enabled to cope with things like 5-minute settlement.
Useful. Thanks, Robin. Roger, any more to add to that pile of asks and changes?
Oh, Mia. I think reserve, to follow up on Paul's point, reserve is a huge, it's part of the balancing mechanism. But it's pricing in that ability to be ready to go. And I think we did a trial back in 2020 with the ESO, demonstrating how batteries could provide a reserve at a way, way better value than the like of gas turbines. There are lots of other things that gas turbines bring. Some people have mentioned them, fault current contributions and true inertia. But I think we proved in that trial, it's worth having a look at it, that the opportunity is there. It's going to be huge. One thing we haven't mentioned, I think other power quality services that batteries can provide. There's 2 gigawatts of batteries now live. That means there's probably about 1.5 gigavar of reactive power. And having done tests with a 41 megawatt asset with reactive power, delivering about 30 megavars, and seeing how much you can shift voltage 6 miles away on a 132 circuit. This is an incredible, powerful net of voltage control we already have installed. So getting those markets and getting it priced correctly, which I don't think the Pathfinder project did, sorry, Zenobi, we need to get those markets, and they will become priced properly. Internationally, I think the US markets, as Robin quoted, they are just fundamentally different to ours. However, there are lessons that could be learned, especially around zonal pricing, and how we might use some of those examples of how the good and the bad of how to deliver that.
Yes, that's useful. Thanks, Roger. And I'll come to you, Emma, as well, because I know obviously based in Ireland as well, so you've got the Irish examples. So yeah, any other kind of international learning we can take, and any kind of particular things anything else you're excited about?
Well, I guess, yeah, just to present another way of doing it again, I suppose the ancillary service market in Ireland is much more centralized. So there's more of a role for EirGrid as system operator to kind of pull strings. I'm sure there's no strings involved, but to optimize assets, compared to here, where you've got more markets and traders doing that role. So I think obviously Britain has a better set of arrangements for sure, because it gives, it allows market participants to optimize rather than relying on a single player, and we don't know the risks of that.
Okay, so then I'll do a very quick last round of final asks then, guys. So yeah, you're looking out into 2035. What do you want to see in your kind of 2035 revenue stack that isn't there at the moment? And I think we've lost Paul on Zenobia's front. Apologies. So I'll just come around you three. If we start with Roger.
Well, I'd like to see. I mean, I think the systems, the technology, investment in technology to make sure our systems are flexible. We know there's value. There's value in flexibility. We know that volatility is going to maybe not increase because it was crazy last year, but it's going to stay or increase at its level. So we need this diversity of solutions. There's other technologies that need to be added into the mix alongside battery energy storage. But we need to invest in the modern flexible technologies, and I'm talking the digital technologies that the grid use, the markets use, and the energy storage providers use. And that's the only way we're really going to deliver net zero against the one certainty we do have, which is that things are going to change.
Nice summary, thanks, Roger. Robin.
In sort of 2035, in that revenue stack, it would be great if we saw kind of more local services on things which actually ease grid constraints. So that could be inertial or voltage control, or more locational ancillary services if that's what a particular area needs. But some markets which actually enable storage to ease some of the grid constraints, as well as by 2035 actually having a lot more grid out there for things to connect to. That would be lovely, I think. And yeah, more BM.
More BM. Excellent. Anything else from you, Emma, before we wrap up?
Yeah, when you asked that question, I just wrote down more batteries doing more things. So
there you go.
This is when we're going to have a fully decarbonized system. So we're going to need battery assets, clean storage, doing all sorts of balancing services and different revenue streams. So I think I'll leave it there.
Excellent. Okay, thank you very much, panel. That was a whistle-stop tour through the area of revenues for electricity storage, and I'm sorry we didn't get to all the questions. There are a lot of questions I couldn't get to. Thank you for putting them in, and hopefully you enjoyed the session. Just have the slides back up if that's okay. A couple of points to highlight. Obviously, we are a membership organization, so we obviously appreciate if anyone online would like to join or is not a member already, please do get in contact with me. I'm your main point of contact, and we can go from there. Hopefully you would definitely see value from your membership over the next few years as the revenues change, as we've discussed. So much change in the markets at the moment. The next slide, please. We've got lots of working groups, I think it's fair to say. So as part of your membership, you get access to a lot of different meetings, and most of these run quarterly throughout the year. And we've also interspersed a few more. So please do get involved. The next one we have in the diary is on the Grid Connections Working Group. And we're going to have some more in-depth, and we'll have a Grid Connections discussion tomorrow as well. So don't forget about that one. But yeah, plenty to be getting involved in. And please make sure, if you're a member, that you get the right people to the different working groups. And just to signpost you on to the upcoming session. So we've had 2 today. So we have 3 more online sessions tomorrow, covering the wonderful world of long duration energy storage, fire safety, and grid connections. So if you or anyone in your organizations wants to come along, registration is still open, and we will see many of you tomorrow online in some way, shape or form. And last thing to do is to thank our sponsors, Road Knight Taylor, Fluence, Schneider Electric, Ethical Power Connections and Ampex, and thank our amazing panel. And Paul, you're back online. Apologies. We're just wrapping up. Perfect timing.
Sorry, yeah, perfectly timed IT issues.
Power cut. I had a power cut early this week. It's an absolute nightmare. Anyway, thank you very much for our panel, and thank you to everyone online. We will leave it there on time. Thanks. Yeah. Cheers. See you soon.
Cheers. Thank you. Thanks, Ollie.
Cheers.